There are certain nights in your life that permanently divide your timeline into before and after. And for me, that night happened deep in the Cherokee National Forest when I was 25 years old. I used to be the kind of person who craved absolute solitude, the type who would drive for hours just to park at a trailhead so remote that the chances of seeing another human were practically zero. My friends called it a death wish, I called it peace. But after what I experienced in that tiny, forgotten cabin, I haven't been able to call it anything except a nightmare. I had been hiking for 2 days, and honestly, it was perfect. The weather was cooperating, the trails were empty, and I felt that rare sense of clarity that only comes when you're miles away from civilization. But on the second afternoon, I noticed something shift in the sky. Dark clouds were building to the west, the kind that don't just bring rain, but announce a complete change in circumstance. I kept moving, hoping I could outpace it, but within an hour the temperature had dropped so dramatically that I had to stop and layer up. The winds started screaming through the trees, and suddenly this wasn't a casual hike anymore. This was survival. Lightning was striking close enough that I could feel it in my chest, and here I was hiking at elevation with a metal-framed pack strapped to my back. I was scanning the tree line desperately for any kind of shelter when I saw it. A structure tucked back in the trees, barely visible through the curtain of rain. It was small, maybe one room, and it looked ancient, the kind of old that makes you wonder if anyone's been inside since the last century. But I didn't care about history. I cared about getting dry. I sprinted toward it, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. It was musty and sour, like animals had been using it as a den, but I didn't care. I peeled off my soaking clothes and just collapsed on the floor. For the first 10 minutes, I wasn't thinking about anything except the fact that I was out of that storm. But eventually, curiosity kicked in, and I started looking around with my flashlight. There was more in that cabin than I'd initially noticed. A sleeping bag rolled up in the corner, newer than everything else, which immediately struck me as odd. A few cans of food on the table, water jugs. It looked like someone had been using this place as a base camp. That wasn't unusual in itself. Hunters and backpackers leave stuff in remote shelters all the time. But then my light hit the wall near the door, and I froze. There were marks everywhere. Long, deep scratches in the wood, some of them fresh enough that the exposed grain was still pale. At first, I thought it was just damage from years of exposure, but when I looked closer, I realized these weren't random. They were intentional. And then I looked at the door itself. The latch was simple, just a basic mechanism, but what caught my attention was the bracket on the outside of the frame, a heavy metal bracket designed to hold a padlock. There was nothing on the inside, no way to secure the door from within. Whoever was in here couldn't lock anyone out. They could only be locked in. I walked to the window next, and my stomach turned. The glass was intact, which was strange given the cabin's age, but the reason became obvious immediately. Screws, driven into each corner of the frame from the outside, sealing it shut. And around the edges on the inside, more of those scratches, deep, desperate grooves that looked exactly like someone had tried to claw their way out with their bare hands. I should have left right then. Every instinct told me to run. But the storm was still raging, and part of me kept rationalizing that whatever had happened here was decades old. So I stayed. An hour passed, maybe more. The storm wasn't letting up, and the rain was so loud on the metal roof that I could barely hear myself think. That's why it took me so long to notice the other sounds. Scraping at first, somewhere along the left wall, then 2 heavy thumps on the porch that weren't thunder and weren't wind. I stood up slowly, staring at a fixed point on the wall, trying to filter out the rain noise and focus on what was outside. But there was nothing, just the storm. I convinced myself it was an animal, a deer seeking shelter, maybe a bear checking out the cabin. I was almost calm again when I felt it. Pressure against the door, like someone leaning their whole weight into it from the other side. The wood creaked, the latch rattled once, then nothing. And that's when the realization hit me, cold and absolute. If someone was out there, why weren't they coming in? The door wasn't locked, nothing was stopping them. Unless they didn't want to come in. Unless the goal was to keep me inside. I don't know if that was paranoia or intuition, but I started packing immediately. I was throwing things into my bag, not caring about organization, just needing to move. I was maybe 30 seconds from walking out that door when I heard glass shatter behind me. I spun around and saw something come through the window, and then the whole world turned orange. The flames spread so fast it was like the cabin had been waiting years to burn. Heat slammed into me, and when I hit the door, it wouldn't budge. Someone had jammed it from outside. I threw myself at it once, twice, and on the third try, it exploded outward. I fell onto the porch, scrambled up, and just ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was tearing through the woods, branches whipping my face, when something hit me from behind and I was on the ground. There was a person on top of me, and suddenly I was fighting for my life in the mud and rain. He was trying to get me in a chokehold, gouging at my eyes, pulling my hair. I could feel myself getting dizzy, but I managed to throw him off and keep running. Behind me, he was screaming, not words, just pure animal rage. I looked back once and saw the cabin fully engulfed, a fireball lighting up the trees. Then I kept running. I don't know how long I ran. I found a gap under some fallen trees and crawled in, and I stayed there until my body stopped shaking. When I finally made it to a trailhead the next morning, the first person I saw drove me to a hospital. I had second-degree burns on my arms and neck. The doctor said I was lucky. I've never felt less lucky in my entire life.
The police took my statement, but I wasn't in a charted area, so there wasn't much they could do. I never went back. I never told my wife the full story. But sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I still think about that cabin. And I wonder who was out there, and why they wanted me to burn. My name is Marcus, and this story starts with a friend who had a dangerous hobby. His name was Derek, and he was obsessed with finding places that didn't exist on any map. Abandoned factories, forgotten bunkers, decommissioned towers. If it was off limits, Derek had probably already scouted it on Google Earth and was just waiting for someone stupid enough to go with him. I was usually that someone. One weekend, he texted me about a fire lookout tower he'd found deep in a national forest about 3 hours from us. Decommissioned decades ago, completely abandoned, just sitting there in the middle of nowhere waiting to be climbed. He wanted to hike out to it, spend the night at the top, watch the sunrise. I told him he was insane. I also told him I was in. We drove out early on a Friday and started hiking around noon. Derek had mapped the whole route based on satellite images, and somehow, after 4 miles of bushwhacking, we actually found it. Seeing it through the trees was surreal. It was this massive steel structure rising out of the forest, with a small cab at the top and a zigzagging staircase leading up. Some of the lower railings were bent or missing. Graffiti covered the support beams. It looked exactly as dangerous as you'd hope. Derek was already climbing before I could talk him out of it. I followed, testing every step before I put my full weight on it. Some of them wobbled. Some of the bolts had rusted through completely. But we made it to the top, and the view was worth every sketchy moment. You could see for miles in every direction. We cracked some beers, watched the sun go down, and for a while, it was perfect. But when darkness settled in, the forest below us became a black void. No lights, no sounds, just absolute emptiness. Derek could tell I was getting uncomfortable, and he started messing with me, grabbing my shoulder, making jokes. Then he smacked his metal water bottle against the tower railing. The sound was deafening. It echoed for what felt like miles, this loud metallic clang that cut through the silence like a gunshot. I actually got angry. I told him that was unbelievably stupid, that we were probably going to get caught now. I went inside the cab to set up my sleeping bag, and I was maybe 5 minutes into it when Derek's voice came through the door, completely different from before. Quiet, serious. He said, "You need to come see this." I walked back out and followed his gaze down into the darkness. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I did. A light. Faint, distant, moving through the trees at what looked like walking pace. My first thought was that someone had heard the clang and was coming to investigate. I whispered that to Derek, but he shook his head. He said, "That light is moving too evenly." He was right. It wasn't bouncing or swinging like someone carrying a lantern. It was gliding, smooth and constant, like it was floating just above the ground. We watched it for several minutes and it became clear it was heading straight for the tower. Then, for just a split second, it zipped forward, like it skipped a few feet instantly. Then it went back to that smooth, steady movement. We were both frozen now. This thing reached the base of the tower after about 10 minutes and just stopped. The light was directly below us, but we couldn't see who or what was holding it. We waited. Nothing moved. Derek, in his infinite wisdom, yelled down, "Hey, you okay?" No response. The light didn't move. We were trapped, 70 feet up, with something below us blocking the only way down. We watched that light for 30 minutes. It never moved. I finally aimed my flashlight straight down, but even with the beam, I couldn't see the source, just the light itself. Then, at some point, I looked away for 5 seconds, and when I looked back, it was gone. Derek was relieved. I was the opposite. Not knowing where that thing was felt infinitely worse than seeing it. We went inside the cab, both of us too terrified to sleep. 20 minutes later, we heard the first sound from below. A loud metallic clang, like someone hitting a support beam with a crowbar. Then another. Then a grinding sound, metal twisting against metal that lasted several seconds. The sounds kept coming from different spots, moving around the base of the tower. We couldn't make sense of it. Whatever was down there was doing something to the structure itself. Then I saw it. A dark shape moving past one of the windows. Then another window. Something was on the walkway outside. Derek and I scrambled to the door and pressed our backs against it, holding it shut. We sat like that for hours, listening, waiting for dawn. By the time sunlight started filtering through the trees, we were completely exhausted. I threw the door open, expecting to find someone crouched outside. There was no one. We grabbed our gear and started descending. We made it about 3/4 of the way down before Derek stopped in front of me. He was just staring at the next section of stairs. An entire section was gone. Not damaged, gone, removed completely. The gap was maybe 6 feet, but it was absolute. There was no way across except to jump. We made the jump. Derek twisted his ankle, but we made it. We got to the bottom and found nothing. No person, no light, no explanation. To this day, I have no idea what we encountered up there. But I know one thing for certain. Whatever it wasn't human.
My name is Evan, and I've been camping alone for 15 years. I know the risks. I carry a .308 bolt action on every solo trip, and I've never had an issue I couldn't handle. Until 2 years ago in the Daniel Boone National Forest. I needed to get away. Work had been crushing me, and I just wanted 3 nights of silence. I parked at a remote trailhead, hiked about 7 miles, and set up camp near a creek bed. Perfect spot. Flat ground, plenty of wood, no signs of anyone else. I had a fire that night, drank a beer, and fell asleep around 10. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night for no reason I could identify. But when I opened my eyes, I noticed an orange glow through the walls of my tent. I unzipped the flap and looked out. About 200 yards away, through the trees, there was a fire. Not a big one, just campfire-sized, flickering. I watched it for several minutes, waiting to hear voices or see movement, but there was nothing. I figured it was another camper who'd gone to sleep and left their fire burning. Irresponsible, but not my problem. I went back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I packed up and hiked over to where I'd seen the fire. It took about 10 minutes to reach the spot. There was nothing. No fire pit, no ash, no scorched ground. The clearing was completely pristine, like no one had been there in months. I checked the surrounding area, nothing. I convinced myself I must have been mistaken about the location, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. I hiked for most of that day, climbing into denser, older forest where the canopy blocked out most of the sky. I found another good campsite around 4 and settled in for the night. I don't know what time it was when the sound woke me up, but it was loud enough to pull me out of a dead sleep. This enormous cracking noise, like a massive branch snapping, except it kept going. It lasted 3 or 4 seconds, and at the end of it, a deep thud that I felt in the ground beneath me. A tree had fallen somewhere in the forest. That wasn't unusual in itself, but there was no wind, no storm, nothing that would cause a healthy tree to fall. I lay there trying to figure it out, and then 10 minutes later, it happened again, louder this time, closer, from a completely different direction. Now I was scared. 2 trees falling on the same night in different parts of the forest with no wind? That wasn't possible. I was still processing that when I heard something new, a low, continuous rumbling sound, like a groan mixed with a growl, but it didn't stop. It went on for what felt like a full minute without any variation or break. I've heard bears, I've heard elk, I've heard bobcats. This wasn't any of those. I grabbed my rifle, chambered around, and aimed at the tent flap. The sound eventually faded, like whatever was making it was moving away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as there was enough light, I packed up and hiked toward where the second tree had fallen. I needed to see it. I needed proof I hadn't imagined everything. I found it after about 10 minutes, a massive trunk lying across a shallow slope. It was real. I walked to the stump, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The break wasn't clean. It wasn't the jagged fracture you get from wind or rot. The wood around the break point had been torn apart. There were long, irregular grooves running through it, some of them an inch deep. It looked like something had chewed through that tree, stripped it, gouged it. The bark around the base had been peeled away in long strips, and the exposed wood underneath had that same torn, shredded appearance. I've seen beaver damage. This wasn't that. I've seen bear damage. This wasn't that either. This was aggressive, methodical, wrong. And then, near one of the branches, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A blue bandana and a carabiner sitting on the ground. My bandana, my carabiner. I tore through my pack. They were missing. Something had been in my camp while I slept. Something had taken my things and brought them here. Something had cut down 2 trees in one night and left my belongings at the base of one of them. I didn't think. I just grabbed my stuff and ran. I ran for hours, my rifle in my hands, expecting something to come out of the trees at any second. I made it to my car around 3 in the afternoon and drove until I found cell service. I called the police. I don't think they believed me. I don't entirely believe myself, and I was there. I still go camping. I can't let that experience take that from me. But I'll never forget the sight of those gouges in that tree, and I'll never understand how something could take my things without ever waking me up. Whatever was in those woods with me, it wanted me to know it had been there. It wanted me to know it could have done more. And I think that's the part that still keeps me up at night.